My name is Brett Holmes. I'm the machinist coordinator here. We're going to show you 7 tips to run a first article part on an NC machine. First, we get drafting from our design graphics. We get a blueprint. Once we go from our blueprint, then we're ready to actually machine. So our tips for the day for you are going to be: first, when you load a part, we want to make sure that the part is actually set the way it's supposed to be and it's nice and secure. So we set our part in, we snug it down a little bit, and then we're going to take a little rubber mallet and smack it down. Then tighten it some more. Your second tip, this is one of the most critical ones, is you always pull the vise handle away from the part that you're running. So now we're set to ready to run on this side. Of course, we've done some other things. We've been able to set the machine up, design what we needed, and get the CAM software to run. So our next tip is, when you load a part, you need to make sure that when you load from your software or from your flash drive that you have the actual program that you're looking for. In this case, we're going to use the program. This is a good program. The second thing, that's one tip. Your other one, to make sure that you have the right one, is always graph your part. Always make sure that you have a graph. This way you can catch if it's the wrong part. By looking at it, here's our part, and when we run our graph screen, we are going to make sure that it looks like the part. Now, when it graphs, it should mildly look like that part. That tells us that 2 things have happened. We have the right program in, and we're ready to go from there. Okay. Our 4th and 5th tips for this, our biggest ones, become critical. When you start talking about running machines, you need to make sure that you understand cutting speeds and feeds, because it's very critical to run quality parts. The other is what they call cutting fluid. Cutting fluid is a way to make sure that you have chip evacuation as well as life of the tool. Our last one, and this is one of the best ones. So when you run a machine, to verify that you have the right work offset, we are going to use G54, which is just an offset number. What that does is, so we know where the start position for the first cut is going to be. To double check that, we send it in our manual mode, and then we hit the cycle start. What that's going to do is, it says G00 is a rapid move to G54 location of X0, Y0. It's going to send the machine to these 2 numbers. That says, okay, I'm ready to run. Now it's at my location, I'm ready to go. Okay? There's 2 other things you can do to make it kind of comfortable for you if you've never ran one before. You can also change in the offset and add a different length. So if I went 1.0 here and said yes, what that does is says, okay, everything that I've touched off, it's going to run 1 inch above the part. So you can dry run it and run parts without cutting things off. We've already dry run, so we're kind of ready to go. So we know everything's ready. So we're going to go back to 0, and I'm going to be ready to run the part. When you run a part, make sure your doors are closed, and we always suggest that you run, because you've never ran before, that your rapid overrides are down to about 50%, just so you have a little more control. When you run a part, your 2 parts are your green buttons, your go, your red buttons, your stop. Always keep your fingers on both buttons. You can stop at any time. We'll run it without cutting fluid in this case, just so you can actually see it running. I can even open your door so it gives you a better look. And we're just going to run that so that you can see it running without cutting fluid. But you can kind of see how the chips are kind of catching on that cover. With cutting fluid, it won't do that.
You, Brett.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Hey, we just want to make sure that when we showed that video that you saw the basics of what it takes to run a CNC machine. And keep in mind, that's the very basics. That's a little bit user-friendly, so anybody can get some basic information on how one works. Here at the college, we do all kinds of things, except that our main function is to train machinists. So if you had machining in your high school and it's something that you want to try, I strongly suggest that you try it there at your high school. We work with every high school in the area that has a machining program. We articulate as much as we can possibly do through machining, as well as if you've done manufacturing tech or done Project Lead the Way. If you come to the campus, make sure that you take your transcripts to our records office, and we will try and give you as much credit as humanly possible. That way you don't have to do things twice. Now, keep in mind that machinists here, we are not like a shop class. We are not like what you're used to in the high school. We are training for entry-level jobs. Last year, our students went out. Our graduates of high school also graduated the program. Our lowest pay was 14, and our highest starting pay was 18. Now, you put that in terms, they're about $32,000 a year to about $38,000 a year. Those students now are both over $20 an hour. So now they're jumping their salary up to about $44,000 a year. Keep in mind that means that they can buy a house, they can buy a car just 1 year out of high school. So we do have those kind of advantages. We do a lot with working with employers in the area. JD, Williams, Parker, NV, True Physician, Lifetime Products, Peterson Inc., and the list goes on and on and on. But we have a very high placement rate, so our students that get certificates here, we're about 98% get a job in the area. And then we have people from outside of Utah asking for our students as well. So if you decide you want to move somewhere, a machinist trade's pretty good. In the last few years, machinists aren't the ones that get laid off. They try to hang on to them because the workforce is getting older, which means that there's more jobs available and less people going into the jobs. So when you look at some of the lists that are out there for the highest need, machining is one all by itself. Manufacturing as a whole is a very high number. They're usually like third or fourth highest job that they need. But machinist as an actual profession, I think last time I seen on Forbes list, it was ranked number 9 hardest job to fill in the country.
Awesome. All right. Anyone have any questions for Brett? What's the weirdest thing you've made? Was a question.
So there's a lot of things that you make as a machinist. The weirdest thing I've ever heard of being made, you talk about building bike parts and you talk about building gun parts. The weirdest thing I've ever actually seen being made is silencers. I had no idea what it took to actually build a silencer. And when you start talking about taking a gun from an automatic to a semi-automatic, I know how that works too. Some of those are pretty cool to see how it goes. The hardest thing for you guys, if you don't know anything about machining, just think of everything that you touch every day. Somewhere a machinist has something to do with that, including the shoes that you're currently wearing. We make the molds for those shoes. So there's all kinds of things that are being done. I don't have as much knowledge in a vast variety of what's being made. I thought I had a really good grasp, so I went to international show in Chicago. And I can tell you that my knowledge base was really, really small compared to what actually goes on worldwide. So there's a kind of that. That's kind of the best answer I got for that one.
Cool. Any other questions? Remember, we got the prizes here for those who participate, a couple of you. So, you know, feel free to ask a few more questions. We have about 3 more minutes.
I usually get, my biggest question most people ask me is why I went into machining. And this is going to date me. Once upon a time, ashtrays were a big thing. Everybody smoked. So I was at a show and I heard this a huge amount of noise going on. So I followed it, found a guy running a machine. He was taking this ugly piece of material and sticking it in a machine, shuts the door, and hits a button. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm building parts." And I said, "Okay, what are we building?" He said, "I'll show you." So he gets down, he takes out, you can easily see it's an ashtray. I said, "So you're building ashtrays?" He said, "Well, it's so people understand." And he says, "But I get to actually take an ugly piece of material and make something everyday use out of it." I said, "Well, what does it take to be a good machinist?" And he said, "You have to have a skill set of making sure that things are precise because our tolerances are so tight." And I said, "What's a tolerance?" And he said, "Tolerances is what parameters you have to hold for the sizes." I said, "What do you mean tight?" And he said, "Do you know what 1/1000th of an inch looks like?" And I'm like, "No, I don't have a clue." He said, well, if you take your hair, one piece of your hair, he said, most hair is about 3,006, 3 to 4,000. Cut that in 3 pieces lengthwise, that's about 1,000th of an inch. I said, well, that's kind of tight. And he says, yeah. And I said, for an ashtray? And he just kind of chuckled. And he said, well, we're just kind of building ashtrays. He said, but think about, at that time, think about engines in an aircraft or an engine in your car or transmissions or all those things, all the gears that are made. That's all done by machinists as well. Now, in today's society, think about artificial limbs. Think about the knee replacements, the hip replacements, the shoulder replacements. Machinist builds that too. Wouldn't you want the guy who knows what he does to make it really tight so it works the way it's supposed to instead of the guy who doesn't really have a clue what he's doing?
So maybe, probably have no time for this. One more question. Maybe how long does it take to become a machinist?
I don't know. I'm going on about 35 years and I don't really know everything. To be an entry-level machinist, it's about 900 hours here at the college. If you're maintaining 100% progress and you get a certificate, full-time, you can usually get done in about 7 months and start your career as a machinist. But to be a really good machinist, you're going to be a couple years. But in that time, you're not going to starve to death. You're going to make enough money to pretty much get whatever you want for the most part. Some of my kids out of Ogden High, when I was up there, that went out to industry, their first year out of high school, they were able to buy whatever car they want, a brand new motorcycle, and buy a house.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Looks like our time's about up, but thank you, Brett, for helping us out.